Do you ever look at board game rankings and go, that is just clearly not the right order, right? That is horrible order. This should be way down here, and this should be so much further up. Well, we're doing it today. I'm looking at the top 25 cooperative board game card games and letting you know my order of what they should be, right? You ready? Let's go. Now again, this is straight from the BoardGameGeek rankings, right? Sorting by cooperative, you get to see the smattering of just across the board what falls under a cooperative game. And again, my subjective opinion says some of these are better cooperative games. Some of these are cooperative in name. And you know what? This is going to be a list that's going to take into a lot more than just how sound the mechanics are, how biased you are for a game in the first place, right? Which is going to be my own bias, right? But accessibility, for example, is what we're talking about here. And let's just go straight up 25-1. So what's number 25? Robinson Crusoe. Again, fantastic resource management, solo game. Lots of upkeep, lots of management, and just lots going on. Difficulty is significant. And from a cooperative game setting, if I'm getting this out onto the table, there are just sometimes that I want to actually have a chance at winning. I don't want to feel like it's a 10% chance of winning and, well, everything has to roll just the right way in order to have that actually happen. And so that's why it's number 25. Number 24 here is Eldritch Horror. Again, not because Cthulhu is not going to make a higher appearance on this list, but this just has some, well, overstaying its welcome issues, right? The concept is relatively simple. It's a pandemic style stomp out the fires of portals, letting great ones and old ones and demons out, and having actions and consequences along the way, and random events, and sometimes some mitigation. But it's not higher on that because the argument with several of these as well shows up where you really need an expansion or two to really just smooth the waters. And if you're going to tell me I need an expansion, well, the base game probably isn't the best base game alone in that sense. So we have to talk about it. Number 23, this is going to be controversial, but again, it's an accessibility issue. And on this one in particular, this accessibility issue is more this side of things, right? Cha-ching! Because Kingdom Death Monster could be one of the best cooperative games all time, but the standing MO of being unwilling to separate out miniatures from gameplay content is, well, just off-putting, and it's not affordable. $400 for a base game, $300 if you're lucky on the secondary market, or whatever holiday special that they're putting out. And again, you know, it's going to give you hours and hours of grindy content. You know, fantastic. There's a lot of games that have really stood on the shoulders of what this has accomplished mechanically speaking in terms of the boss battling, dungeon crawl, narrative aspect of things, of which we'll see several on this list as well that have influences there. But you know what? I can't arguably put a game like this in terms of expense any higher up whatsoever. Similarly, at number 22, Too Many Bones. Again, this falls very much under the Too Many Bones, Robinson Crusoe, also next one on the list sort of argument as well of this is a solo driven game mostly. This is a lot of solo driven gaming. It is okay at two people, but it's just like, well, let's just go back to back here with number 21, Mage Knight, where the vast majority of people are playing it solo, and then the rest are playing it two-player. And again, as a cooperative game, I like to think that sometimes you can play things more than just two-player. I'm going to be a hypocrite later in this list. You'll understand why. It just doesn't do it well at 3 and 4 because of the huge lag time and downtime in between. I mean, personally speaking, again, I'm going to mark that down. Mechanically, everyone loves it. It's an incredibly hard learn. It's a lot to digest. It's, you know, a little bit of a harder sell from that aspect as a premium product too. It's not as inaccessible as a few of these price-wise that are ahead of it, but it has to be mentioned. Similarly with Mage Knight, right? This is the ultimate example for anytime the question comes up, which game has the worst rulebook in the history of board games, this one inevitably gets thrown into the conversation, right? As tremendous as a solo and two-player game as this can be, as a combination of the ultimate, I'm trying to figure out and use what I have in front of me in order to just wipe out the enemies on the board in a map state with a very limited action economy. So it's doing tremendous things in that way. But number 20 sort of, again, piles on in the accessibility issues because you have Gloomhaven, right? And, you know, number 19 is going to be similar in Frosthaven because you can't talk about one without talking about the other. This may be the best, mechanically speaking, dungeon crawl of all time. But if it's going to cost you somewhere between $100 and $200, and you're going to end up with a box that is going to take you hours to punch, sort, and organize, again, you may get your money's worth, or you just may get your dust collection's worth, right? In terms of how much dust is collecting on it, because it's such a bear to set up, tear down, and remember the minutia of the rules along the way. Frosthaven does no different, only they just did more of it all at the same time, right? It's going to be divisive. People are going to yell at me in the comment section, but you know what? Again, if this is a hobby, casual game style of things, neither of those are accessible in any other way. Number 18 with Oathsworn, I mean, it's slightly better as a mainly driven boss battler with less of the in-between, a slightly lower price point potentially. But again, it doesn't venture far enough away from that. It just gives you more of the cooperative, you know, bang, instead of all of the minutia of managing stuff in between. And sometimes the managing stuff in between is really, really nice. And some of it is just also too much narrative, too many standees, too many pieces. And so Oathsworn is a little bit lesser, and less is more in this case, but that's why it's number 18. Number 17, again, I could probably swap this with number 18 there with Oathsworn, but number 17 is Tainted Grail. Tainted Grail, again, as a very solo-heavy driven narrative style resource management. People like it though, but is it doing things that much better? Because when you have to make a 2.0 version and everyone says the 2.0 version is that much better, I can't rank this any higher based off of just comparisons in that sense. Number 16, Arkham Horror LCG, right? Again, speaking of games that have horrible rulebooks to learn from, and again, with an FFG product, one core box wasn't enough to get a full real experience. The other accessibility issue here in this case is your deck constructing. And deck construction is a barrier to entry for a lot of people. Myself, my wife included. And so this is no different. Now with the revised content, you don't have to buy more than one box. But if you want any sort of those campaign narrative escapades that a lot of these other games, both before and after this in the list, are offering, well, you're going to have to buy additional content and additional content and additional content, and then mix it in and figure out the combos and additional content. So where some of these just give you it all and help you slot it in, this one's going to make you do a lot of the legwork yourself. And it's going to be a slightly cheaper price point to get in, but not necessarily by the time you're actually getting the same amount of content as, say, one of the havens that we just mentioned. Number 15, we're going down to Sleeping Gods, only because I think the rules are more accessible, but this is a narrative style adventure open world campaign situation from Red Raven Games, and again, it takes more of that spin on it, less bang bang combat, take that, but just more open world saving. Do you have the time to spend 100 hours, you know, getting all of the different side quests and everything else RPG video game style in the first place? So if that's your ilk and you love the art aesthetic that Red Raven is known for, well, then you go for it. Again, it's a lot of management of minutia along the way when you're doing this campaign and the resources. So do you prefer resources? Do you prefer dice? That's going to be your big make it or break it. Then at 14, we also have another Awakened Realms games with the form of Nemesis as the preeminent alien-based IP style of game. The fiddliness, the upkeep, the learning minutia of the rules is burdensome. It doesn't get away from that with any of its subsequent sequels. But this is the OG, and there's a reason people like it. Thematically incorporated, there's nothing else out there that quite has the same encapsulating toxicity in a good way, right? Just like the comparison of Unfathomable not quite capturing the BSG Battlestar Galactica vibe, you know, Nemesis has yet to be duplicated in any other feature. And so you have a lot of people that are looking for that scare me alien vibe with a semi-cooperative-esque trader element that's involved as well. Then you're going to Mansions of Madness at number 13. Try and get the mystery. 1 to 5 players, one versus all when somebody becomes the bad guy, with an app-driven system as you're exploring Arkham's cursed mansions looking for answers, right? open the door, figure out what's going on, conquer the evil that's going along with it in the first place. Again, it's probably an accessibility, and it's probably also an app issue as well. Are you a fan of app integration or not? But similarly, price point wise, not terribly different than the ones we've covered. It's just going to be more straightforward because of the app, say what you will, one side of the fence or the other. Then number 12, Mechs versus Minions, one of the few forays from the video game side of things that has probably exceeded any of the expectations that were out there. Riot Games captured magic in a bottle with this one as an action programming cooperative pilot your mechs and defeat marauding monitors as they're invading. Teamwork, programming, and multiple different resettable scenarios with the price point combination of the miniatures and the deluxeified that it was offered from a price point standpoint was actually relatively outstanding. The problem is it's basically out of print. And so similarly to some of the Mansions of Madness second edition expansion stuff, it's going to be very hard to come by unless you can get a good deal, even though people say it is a tremendous game for all levels of gamers. And that's why I have to include it on this list as high as it is. Now, number 11, just falling outside of the top 10, we begin the run of the Pandemics. Pandemic Legacy Season 2, arguably the second one that came out, but the third one in terms of who is favored and why. Without going into spoilers, it just didn't seem as complete to people. People didn't feel like it offered the same thrilling narrative roller coaster that one did, and even Zero does in a slightly different way, although it always feels weird to call Zero in a game as opposed to, a prequel. But Season 2 falling just outside the top 10 for that reason. Season 0, number 10. And again, just similarly doing things slightly better head-to-head comparison-wise as Season 2, but not quite achieving the heights of Season 1 as we've seen, that you'll see in a minute. Then we have to talk about number 9, cracking the top 10. The other of the Gloomhavens is The Jaws of the Lion. And this makes the top 10 because, again, you have a game that is much more accessible and an easier to play version. A $20 to $30 game at any store that you would like to potentially get it at, even if you don't order it online and you prefer to go to something like your local Target. The spiral-bound notebook, the ease of accessibility, the gradual learning of rules makes this game much better cooperatively overall from a holistic standpoint than either of its older brothers or sisters. And so that's why it is easily much higher on this list without any question. Number 8, again, going back to the LCG, but getting a little bit more personal because I think you get a little bit more mileage out of your core game, and that's Marvel Champions. Much more well known as an IP, much more friendly to the easygoing non-gamer gamer, and again, just going to be a little bit easier to get to the table, although FFG's rulebooks, again, as the 6th or 7th iteration rolls around with errata and wording issues, does make it a little bit of a chore with added expansions, but you can pick and play your favorite characters, expansions, story arcs. The biggest downside is, well, again, I'd make the argument that 2 is probably your player count du jour, as well as not having any linkage between said scenarios in the first place. The customizability and the variability might make up for that, or it might not, depending on how you feel. Then at number 7, we're going to Aeon's End. Cooperative deck building done well. The really first big market cooperative deck builder that gave us these aspects of going against a boss in this way to that extent. The variability, the expansion content, we're not even going to talk about that because it does jump the shark a little bit, but Aeon's End as a whole has been a trendsetter just in the similar manner of Kingdom Death Monster in providing the shoulder in which a lot of subsequent deck builders have built off of, whether or not you like the randomization of the initiative order or the asymmetry and the randomness of the market that can both win the game and lose the game depending on how meta you want to play it. Number 6, we're going into the first of the crew, the Quest for Planet 9. The trick taking, see if you can play cooperatively with your friends for the non-trick takers. You want to get it for about $10? Accessibility, accessibility, accessibility. This screams it all over the place. It offers a slight twist on what we were usually seeing as a trick taker, as one of the more recent and definitely the most headway of the cooperative, when usually this is dominated by a competitive scene in the first place. Then we're hitting the top 5 here, and we're going with one of the most recent cooperative games to break into the market, and we're going to go with Sky Team as a dice-based 2-player cooperative land the plane before you crash style of things. Price point, gameplay, mechanics, it's striking on all cylinders, and I don't think this is going to be your latest hotness. The fact that it's even in the top 25 on the BoardGameGeek within a year of launching and getting wide retail release says something, and I'm going to give kudos where kudos is due and put it in the top 5 here as well. Number 4, we are going to go with the opposite side of the crew, the Deep Sea Mission. Are hitting the opposite end of the spectrum with this, less so the 2-player, really needing at least 3 if not 4, just like the similar crew version, but it's giving you more mission variety. It's giving you everything you want with more deduction, communication, and limited information with a, potentially under 20 minutes round by round by round replayability time and time again, with people constantly asking for more. Just again, a second iteration of the game that smooths out all the bumps in the errata of the first one and makes it a better experience overall. Number 3 on this list, Pandemic Legacy Season 1. And this isn't any higher on this list because, again, it's a Pandemic Legacy version of things. This may be the best Legacy game ever made. This may be the best Legacy game no matter who you are, what you like, mechanics you prefer, whatever it may be, right? But it still is ultimately a Legacy game. And so when we're talking about this, the thing that always limits Legacy games, that puts a ceiling on them in my opinion, is that you need to have the same consistent group, and you can only play it so many times before it's just done. So experience and storytelling while you're in it, great. But the thing I don't see people saying is, oh yeah, Chris, I'm going to go back and play my Pandemic Legacy Season 1 that we finished. Said pretty much no one ever, right? If you want to go play that repeatedly, maybe go pick up Iberia. But then we hit number 2, which again is going to be a little divisive. I'm going to make the argument that Cthulhu Death May Die does everything in a light dungeon crawl, non-scenario based upgrade, craziness, dice chucking style of things that you may like. And the base game is going to give you more than enough. Any additional content will cost you gadzooks, but guess what? You don't need it because it's going to give you enough legs to run on. The biggest downside is the modularity of the board setup in the first place, just because sometimes putting those tiles together in the arrangements that are specified is just freaking annoying. And you can make an argument that some of that expansion content is just little tweaks of the same characters and slightly different varieties, modes, and abilities. And so that isn't going to give you your mileage, but this one ultimately is going to be one of the best, most fun experiences you can have around the table with, well, again, probably a 3 or 4 player count as you try to fend off the insanity, fend off the old ones, and wrap it up before everyone needs to go to bed. And then number 1, what else could be number 1, right? It's the best cooperative game of all time, Spirit freaking Island. I'll fight you in the comment section down below, or you're probably going to fight me based on these rankings, but this is the preeminent non-quarterbacking cooperative game of all time. It does things in an asymmetric spirit-based manner, fending off invaders from your island, trying to reverse style what we usually see in typical historical settings. It does so in crazy, ingenious ways with card-driven aspects of a slight deck build, with an action economy system that is both clever, unique, complicated, but also not duplicated. So that is why it is number 1. Any of the expansion content just adds more of the amazing thing. So there you go. Top 25 games reordered. What do you think? Where do you think things should be? How wrong was I? And a little bit of summary here at the end. What were the biggest winners and losers of this top 25? Well, truth be told, I moved up Aeon's End and Sky Team because they were sitting in the 20s on the BoardGameGeek list, as well as the Crew and the Planet 9. But Gloomhaven was sitting at 2, Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion sitting at 3, Nemesis at 5, and Frosthaven at 6. So those got way, way downgraded, even with Too Many Bones and Mage Knight. So again, just goes to show, I think BoardGameGeek tends to skew heavily on the blending of mechanics. And if you could sort out truly cooperative games, maybe even at a 3 or 4 player count, I think this list would look dramatically different as a whole. But that's why I wanted to talk about it, and that's why we need to talk about it even further, because it's just fun to do sometimes. Let me know what you think. What are your top cooperative games? I'll be doing a different video similarly, but also a slight twist, tier ranking all of my own personal cooperative games in the near future. So if you like that sort of thing, subscribe, tune in. Peace out, stay classy, have a great freaking day.